Hey y'all, and welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be looking at a chess tournament that I played recently where I was able to win all 3 of my games and get the first place prize. This tournament was played on Wednesday of last week where the time control was around 30 minutes with 5-second delay per game, and let's just get into the chess. So game 1, as you can see, I'm playing a 1750 who I decided to name Arjun. I didn't give him a last name or anything on my notation sheet, but okay. I start off the game with pawn to d4, and my opponent decides to play the move pawn to c6, which kind of tells me immediately that my opponent really doesn't like playing against pawn to d4, because pawn to c6 is basically just inviting me to play pawn to e4 and to play a Caro-Kann, which I'm sure that my opponent would be more than happy with. This is actually what I used to play back in the day against pawn to d4 when I was a little less familiar with d4, d5 positions. But okay, I decide I don't want to play into a Caro-Kann. I would much rather play a move like bishop to f4 and transpose back into a position that I know more logically. My opponent goes knight to f6. I decide to play the move pawn to c4, of course. Going with pawn to c4 immediately. If I play the move e3, which looks logical, I thought my opponent could have this idea of knight d5, bishop g3, and I thought maybe something like this could exist, and I just didn't want to give my opponent extra ideas here. Maybe it's bad, it's most likely bad because pawn to c4 now comes with tempo, but I thought that why am I letting my opponent have extra plans when they really should not be allowed to do that? So okay, pawn to c4. My opponent goes pawn to d5, and now pawn to e3, inviting takes to be recaptured with the bishop. Knight d5 wouldn't be too much of a problem. If we look at this line, takes here, I am significantly better in this position since I have both of my pieces developed. My opponent's dark squared bishop has not really had the chance to get developed, probably e6, and I'd play a move like knight f3, maybe knight c3 is even better here, knight c3, maybe he takes, and I just have 2 pieces developed while my opponent has none. But anyway, my opponent doesn't go for that. My opponent goes for pawn to e6. I go with knight to c3, bishop d6, and bishop back to g3. Of course, in these positions, when your opponent puts their bishop on d6, the most natural way to go about it is to drop my bishop back to the g3 square, saying that, okay, if now you take my bishop, I'm going to take back with the h-pawn and open up my rook, which could be an attacking piece later in the game. And my opponent thinks for a while here, clearly not really understanding the position that much, and decides to take my bishop, which I immediately thought was a little bit wrong. There are some positions where you can do this with black and it's actually okay, but this position is not one of them, because after hg, my opponent doesn't really have the ability to force me to castle yet. Like, if my opponent makes me castle, then yes, this h-file doesn't really matter. But in this case, I have the extra option to keep my king in the center in the future, and now I can use this h-file for an attack. Maybe I can play a move like knight f3, bishop d3, and walk my king over with king f1, king g1. That could also be very interesting. Or I can put my king in the center of the king e2. I start doubling up with a rook h4, queen h1, stuff like this. And it can get pretty bad for my opponent if he doesn't know what he's doing, which at this point, I'm already pretty confident that he doesn't. My opponent goes knight bd7. I play the move knight to f3, which I thought was very, very natural. Bringing a knight into the center, developing a piece, makes a lot of sense. Computer gives g4 here, and just going for it immediately, but I thought that that could wait for later, so instead knight to f3, my opponent goes pawn to h6, stopping some attacking ideas, and I play the move bishop d3 after some thought, deciding that yes, I could go for the attack. I could go with a move like knight e5 here, and then like, let's say knight e5 takes, knight d7, then I could play a move like f4. I could do something like this, and like maybe this would work, but also probably my opponent doesn't have to take. Like in this position, he can just, yeah, best move DC. And I was thinking maybe I could do that, maybe I could do something else, maybe I could get aggressive like queen c2, or play something like queen b3, something like this. I could play a move like rook c1 and go after the queen side, but I'm just deciding, okay, I want to develop my bishop first of all. That's a piece that I haven't moved yet. I should finish my development, and if my opponent decides to take on c4 and make my bishop move again, I think go ahead and do it, because then you lose a lot of your center control, and your knight no longer has this outpost on e4. But that's exactly what my opponent does. He takes on c4. I recapture the bishop, moving my piece twice in the opening, and my opponent decides to play the move knight to b6, which I think is a mistake. I think this move was pretty bad, and of course the engine agrees with me here, because this move knight to b6, what it does, first of all, is why my opponent wanted to play it. He wanted to hit my bishop. He wanted to hit my bishop, he wanted to make my bishop move again. He wants to get his knight more active, maybe he wants to put knight here. However, this doesn't really make a lot of sense the more you think about it, because what this knight was doing on d7 was it was preventing my knight from really easily getting to the e5 square, which is an important square for me and an area that really facilitates an attack for white. So by doing this move knight to b6 and going after the d5 square, he allows me knight e5, plus if my opponent ever goes to the d5 square, I'm actually probably just going to argue that this is a waste of time. I'm going to play a move like queen d3. I'm going to go e4 at some point. This knight is actually a target here. If you take on c3, thank you again. You're bolstering my center. I'm going to play pawn to e4 next. I'm going to maybe play knight e5. I might play pawn to e5. It's going to get bad. It's going to get bad for black. And I was really liking my chances here. My opponent went bishop d7, and I realized my opponent's idea. If my opponent was going to castle, probably they would play the move knight b5 first, and then they would like castle here, and they'd wait for this bishop to get developed, maybe to pawn to b6, something like this. Get this light square bishop developed in some way. However, by playing the move bishop d7, I realized what my opponent's intention was, at least what I thought. I thought that my opponent had the idea of castling long. And play a move like queen c7 and long castle. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. He's really worried about my rook. Also, by the way, another thing to note here is that my opponent had been spending a lot of time in this opening here. He had already spent like 10 minutes. And reminder, this is only a 30-minute long game. Not long game, but like 30 minutes for both sides. So you really don't have that much time to spend. It's not like a classical game, not like a 1-hour game. My opponent shouldn't be thinking this much. And after this move, he spent like 5 minutes on this move. I could really sense that my opponent wasn't really in the game. He didn't have his head in the game. So I decided, okay, what's the best way to deal with someone lower rated? You go on a belligerent attack and they self-destruct. So I'm just going to play knight e5. Pretty simple. This is the square that knight wants to be on. So my knight's going to come here. It's targeting the f7 square. Maybe I'm going to take it at some point. If my opponent castles, he's kind of castling into my attack. Like, for example, castles, I might already have, like, rook h6. Computer doesn't like it, obviously. But, like, at some point, maybe I play g4, g5 first. And then I go queen f3, queen h3, something like this. But, okay. I digress. And after this move, knight e5, my opponent kind of shares his plan again. And it makes it even more obvious that he's trying to castle long with the move queen to e7. Which is a move that makes sense, but I'm like, okay, now he's going to castle long, it's going to be fine. I'm going to try to meet him there. I was also thinking here, I was thinking about a couple things here. One thing I was not thinking about, however, is the top engine move, which is pawn to a4. I didn't look at this move at all. It makes a lot of sense. It's saying that, oh, if you castle long, I'm going to play pawn to a5, and my rook gets active that way. I was really looking at two things. I was looking at the move queen f3, which I end up playing later, and the move rook to c1, which is very, very natural, and it gets on the c file where the king would end up when he castled. And this was my whole plan. And actually, I played the move rook c1, which is a mistake. Queen f3 is actually even better than rook c1. a4 is still a top engine move. My other intention was queen f3, which I'm going to go on over for a little bit. And the point here with this move queen f3 is that kind of in two ways. First of all, I'm getting my queen active like this. So if this knight is going to have difficulty moving, the queen's going to get pinned to the pawn, it's going to be a big issue. The second and really the main reason, also this facilitates g4, g5 at some point. The second and really like the main reason why, one more thing that this does is actually I can go over to h3 after g4. The main reason why I play this move is I wanted to discourage my opponent from playing c5, which I thought could be another little extra idea that he has to play c5 and like open up his bishop that way. That's not the arrow. Open up his bishop that way, and that was like maybe the point of queen here. Of course, after queen to f3, maybe it would be a little bit more discouraged from doing that as the pawn on b7 is going to be hanging. But okay, I decided to play this move rook c1 anyway. saying that if you play the move pawn to c5, I can like maybe take. I might have tactics with like knight d5, but moreover, I just think that your queen is going to be in the harm's way, and I might even take here, and I might play a move like knight here and like bring the rook into c7, and my rook gets active that way, and also it develops another piece. My opponent plays this move rook d8, which immediately tells me, first of all, that he's not going to castle long anymore. Second of all, that he really wants to play the move pawn to c5 because now he's opening up against my queen. And third of all, he's probably going to castle short. So here I decided, I thought for a little bit, I actually thought probably not even that much, probably like a minute or two. And I played the move queen f3. And the point of this move is pretty simple. It's basically what I just said in the last time. Now I'm playing pawn to g4, pawn to g5. I'm playing this knight to e4 in some lines. This doesn't really matter anymore, but it still exists, so my opponent's going to have a hard time playing pawn to c5. And now after he castles short, my queen is going to be here to meet him along with my rook. Also at this point, I have decided that I'm keeping the king in the center. We are not going to be castling short in this game. My opponent thinks for a little bit, and he plays a really, really bad move. He plays the move knight f to d5. Which immediately kind of tells me that my opponent is losing the thread. He's losing the thread. He doesn't understand what's important here. He doesn't understand that this position is about to get really, really bad for black. I quickly play the move knight to e4. Of course, this move makes a lot of sense. I'm bringing my knight into the center. It's coming into the attack, and I have a sneaky little threat. If my opponent plays something like this, knight to d6 comes, takes, and checkmates. And of course, if my opponent doesn't take, I can just like do whatever. Knight to g6, here. I mean, it's over. So I think I'm doing pretty well. My opponent is forced to play this move bishop to c8 after some thought. And I play the move queen to g4. Simply just going after the king, making sure that he can't castle, of course, because of rook h6. And my opponent's going to lose the game. Also just targeting this pawn. If my opponent goes here, again, rook h6. If he takes, I win this. I just like win the game outright. How do I win the game here? Queen h7 is what the engine says, but I believe there should be something better. I guess not. I guess there's nothing better than queen h7, but again, I do win a pawn in that line. My opponent spent some time trying to figure out how to survive this position. He plays the move pawn to g6, and I start to calculate, because here I realize this is the critical moment of the game. I probably have a win. I most likely, in this position, I can win the game on demand. And that's what I was thinking. I was trying to spend time to try and figure out how to do that. My first intention, of course, is knight g6. But I think that knight g6 doesn't work, because after fg here, I thought he could just run his king, and I didn't really see where my attack is. Like, I can win all of his pawns, but like he runs to c7, and I wasn't sure about this position. I didn't think I was winning. I thought I probably had lost all my advantage knight g6. So okay, knight g6 doesn't work. Pretty obvious. My other intention is knight f7, sacking towards the center. This would work if there wasn't a rook here. The rook is here. I can't do that. So then really there's only one other option to go for, and that's to bring more pieces to the party, bring more pieces to the attack. And I think for a little bit, and I play this move, knight to g5, which gets my knight slightly closer into the game, threatens f7. If my opponent goes here, I can probably just take the pawn on h6. This is my intention. Of course, he can't capture, because then I take the rook for free. My opponent has to sack his queen. This is good enough for me. And all in all said, how is he going to be able to defend this pawn? And this is my question to him. And of course, after pawn to f6, I had to calculate this as well, but I realized that knight g6 should be completely winning. I'm attacking this, queen check, I can go like king f1, I can walk my king over here. I do have to be careful to calculate this line, but I have this move rook d1, defended by the bishop and the queen. My opponent takes a pawn, I can just take the rook, and my opponent's probably getting mated in a couple of moves. That's something I had to calculate as well. But what I really had to calculate was something that I didn't see at all from afar, and that was this move pawn to h5, which my opponent played after like 5 minutes of thought, and it really shocked me, because I thought that I was just going to have a clean game, and now I'm starting to panic, because I realize that my opponent is actually okay. My first intention is to play this move queen h4. But I realized that I think it just doesn't work. I think my opponent can play this move pawn to f6. And I can't take this pawn because my opponent takes here with tempo. And that's the difference. If my opponent plays pawn to f6 in the other position, after here, he can't take with tempo. My queen isn't hit. I just take his queen. So I realized this, so I'm like, okay, whoa, that's really scary. I'm not a big fan of this. I'm not a big fan of this queen h4 mumbo jumbo. I hope that maybe I have something else. Maybe I have something else to play on here. So my second intention is queen f3. And this idea is that he can't take my knight because of mate. And if he goes with some check, I walk my king over. I'm trying to calculate this. This is what I was calculating for the longest time, this move pawn to f6. And I was thinking that this was losing, actually, after knight g6, rook g8. And I just didn't see how I was able to survive here. I actually just missed queen h5 from afar. But this line doesn't work for another reason. My opponent can simply castle in this position. And yeah, I still have an attack, but definitely not what it once was. So I wasn't too sure about queen f3. So there's only one other option. And this is the last thing I calculated. It was either queen f3 or this move. I was thinking about sacrificing my queen. I was thinking about this move, knight g8 takes f7. And the point is, first of all, if he takes, I'll take on h8. My opponent has to sack his queen, and I win the game. That's pretty obvious. If my opponent takes here, I can simply take. I win the game. I'm up a rook. So that's all well and good. But what about the line that my opponent plays with the move queen to b4? And this is what I was struggling with for a while. I was trying to understand, is this okay? Like, I sack my queen for 2 rooks. Maybe I'm worse. Maybe I'm better. Maybe it's equal. I'm not sure. But I think it's a better option than queen f3 because queen f3 doesn't look good. It looks like I'm losing after queen f3. So, okay, I go down this line. And after queen b4, my big idea was that I'm not going to be playing the move king f1. I'm not playing king f1. Because here I thought that after takes, my opponent has like ideas of queen d2, and he's like hitting my rook, and after here he wins the pawn, and oh my god, what's going on? I don't know what's going on. He's gonna go here, and then my position's gonna crumble to dust, and he's gonna have like attacks all over and stuff, and I was kind of worrying myself, and I was getting a little scared. So I'm like, okay, I'm not playing king f1 in this position. I'm gonna play king to d1. They're both the best move, surprisingly. And now he's not going to have queen d2, and I'm so smart. And we go down this line, hg, rook takes h8. Here, I think for a little bit about which piece to capture, I end up taking with the knight. And the point of this move is that now I'm attacking this pawn. Like if my opponent goes here, now I take, and I'm forking the king and the queen, and life is good. And also if I take with the rook, now I don't have the option of taking on g6 with check when I need to, because of course my rook would be, my knight would be left hanging. So knight takes d8, which I think is the best move. And here we get into a little bit of chicken. My opponent plays the move queen to b5. I decide, after some thought, okay, this is a little dangerous, this queen f1 mumbo jumbo, and getting after my pawns. And if I like allow that, if I like take on g6, for example, I thought that it could be really bad here with like queen f1 and like check, and like I will lose all my pawns and bad things happen. Of course, not like this, knight g4, but I thought bad things might be able to happen there, and I didn't want to go down this idea of like queen f1 stuff. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to take on g6. I'm simply going to play the move king e1, and my opponent goes with the move queen b4. I go king back to d1. My opponent goes queen to b5, and my opponent offers a draw in this position. This position is very difficult to play. This position is very, very difficult to play with the white pieces. There's a lot of things that I could do. There's a lot of ways for me to go wrong here. And I thought for a while, I really didn't want to accept this guy's draw because, well, he's lower rated than me. I'm trying to win the game. I think that I have like a material advantage. I should be able to make some chances. I'm thinking about a couple things. First of all, I'm thinking about this move knight c4, just blocking it, just trying to get in the way and like takes and stuff like this. I'm trying to make sure that I'm not losing. I am losing. because of this knight. This knight is really, really stuck here. So I'm looking at that, and then I realize, wait a second. Why can't they just take this pawn and defend f2? So I do that. And then takes g4. This move actually loses the game. But it loses the game in like such a spectacular way that like you wouldn't even understand. Queen f1 is what my opponent plays, and he's just losing after queen g2, king e2. In this position, my opponent can play the move, amazing move, pawn to e5. And he wins the game here. There's nothing for me to do. Let's say I go here, queen d3, king e1, bishop takes g4. I lose my knight. How about we don't hang the knight? Okay. Let's say we take the pawn. Okay, reasonable. Mate in 5. Queen f1, king c2. My opponent gets the bishop in the game. Okay, then what are we supposed to do? How about we play move knight h6, stopping this. All right. My opponent has knight takes h3, knight takes e3, fe3, queen to d3 check. I have to come here, queen e3. I have to come back, and my opponent, queen d3, king e1. Let's look at the engine line. What happens? Queen g3, king e1, queen d3. We repeat like this a bunch. And at the end of the line, my opponent is actually able to win almost all of my pawns with check. Like this. Check. Let's look down the line a little bit. Let's say king d2. Nope. Queen g2. King d3. Pawn to e4. Oh man. King c3. And yeah, pawn to e3. And this is how my opponent wins the game here. This is the long engine line that I definitely didn't calculate, and I'm just looking out right now. This is pretty difficult. This is a pretty difficult position. He's also, by the way, threatening queen here. Checkmate. Yeah, it's bad. It's really bad. I didn't see that. I didn't see all that. Instead, I just took on g4, and my opponent didn't see it either. He plays queen f1, king d2, queen g2, and I decided to play the move king to e2. And I'm just saying, well, now you can't go to f3. If you come here, I'm going to play the move pawn to f3. And actually, my pawn armada gets really strong here with my knight defending the pawn on e3. And the queen has to come here. And then my knight probably goes here. And you get it. You get the picture. Like, my opponent's in trouble. My opponent's in really, really big trouble. My opponent goes knight back to d7, which is logical. He's trying to defend this square here. Make sure that this knight has some trouble getting back to the game, and I play this move bishop to c2 after some thought, with the idea that basically I'm trying to trap his queen. I'm taking away the final escape square, and rook h2 is going to trap his queen. So I'm like, that's great. Also, at this time, we are officially under 5 minutes on the clock, and time is ticking. It's getting pretty bad. I have to be very, very careful here. If my opponent plays a move like knight 5 f6, it's fine for him. Like, I play here. Takes, let's say knight here. I should be able to survive. The computer gives rook h7, and like white is just winning. But okay, my opponent doesn't do that, and instead plays the move pawn to b6. And I realize that there's two options that I could go for. First of all, I could play this move rook h2, which traps the queen. And this is what I was looking at for the longest time. I was like, okay, I want to play rook h2. That seems like a good idea. But now my opponent blunders something else. I have knight takes c6, king d6, and rook takes bishop. Real simple. I just win a piece. Now I'm thinking, what's the cleanest way to go about it? Rook h2 traps the queen, my opponent's gonna take, and then take the knight. And like I'm gonna be up in exchange and a bunch of pawns. I don't know, maybe it's good, maybe it's not. Who knows? Or I could be up a piece. But I thought that the simplest way to go about it, the way that gives black the least amount of counterplay, because a queen can be tricky, I thought that winning the queen is the best option, and I completely missed the move bishop a6. And I realized, oh no, we are not trapping the queen. That's pretty funny. Instead of doing that, I should have just gone knight c6 and gone for this, of course, but whatever, you live and you learn. Rook h2, my opponent goes here, and I go with the move bishop d3, and it is officially equal. It's equal because bishop d3, king d3, and my opponent goes check here, and the queen gets out to d5 or e4 or whatever, and the position is just equal. My opponent's able to like survive here. I can't play knight c6 anymore because the knight defends here. There's a lot of little tactics here. Let's say I play the move knight b7. My knight's really never getting out, and it's for this fact that I'm mainly just not going to be able to make any more progress here, and we're going to have to settle with a draw. But instead, after bishop takes d3 and king takes d3, my opponent doesn't go for that. Since he's at low time, he has like 1 minute left on the clock since he's been playing so slow. He goes queen to f3, and now the win is pretty simple. Knight takes c6, king d6, knight ce5. Going after the queen, his queen really only has one square. This move f5. I go pawn to e4. My opponent's queen really only has one square again. If he goes here, this is a fork. I win the game immediately, or I can have some checkmate after rook c6. My opponent goes queen f8, and after rook c6, king e7, and knight takes g6, forking the king and the queen, my opponent resigns the game, giving me my first win of the day and a good time. I just realized that this video has been going on for 25 minutes already, and we are one game in. This game is a pretty good one, but I will try to go a little bit faster with the next couple games because I do want this video not to be over an hour because people's attention spans are pretty short. In any case, let's get on to game number 2. In this game, I'm playing with the black pieces against Ishrath Aminataj, who I actually wrote down the name of on my score sheet so I know their full name. This person I was a little bit worried about for some reason. Like I kind of respected her a little bit more than my other opponent. I have never heard of this person before. I didn't hear about my first opponent before either, but okay, I don't know why I respected her so much. But anyway, my opponent goes, let's get into the chess. My opponent starts off the game with move pawn to e4, and I go pawn to c5. Really working on my words here. Pawn to c5. Knight to c3, pawn to d6, kind of allowing my opponent to get into lines I know with like here, 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 here. In any case, my opponent goes pawn to g3 and plays into a bit of a King's Indian attack style position with moves with ideas ranging from like pawn to e3, bishop g2 here, and playing for like f4, e4, trying to come down at my king side in the future. Knight to f6, bishop g2, knight to c6. My opponent goes pawn to d3. I go pawn to g6 after some thought, trying to just get my bishop developed and playing pretty reasonably. My opponent goes knight g2, bishop g7, short castles. And here's the first time that I actually start thinking and trying to like think about my position a little bit. I decide after some thought that my opponent's a little bit lower rated than me. I'm gonna go for an attack. It worked out the last game. I'm gonna go for some belligerent kingside attack that probably doesn't work, but it's gonna freak out my opponent and they're gonna self-destruct. I play the move pawn to h5. And I wouldn't have done this. I wouldn't have done this move pawn to h5. I wouldn't have even thought about this move pawn to h5 if I was playing someone a little bit higher rated. If I was playing like a 1900, for example, pawn to h5 wouldn't have crossed my mind. But since I'm playing someone so low rated, I decide that this move works out, and at some point, if my opponent doesn't know what they're doing, they can actually get into some trouble with a move like pawn to h4, and then like bishop g5, and I get in the position. And I'm right, actually. If my opponent like freaks out and plays a move like pawn to h4, she's already worse after bishop g4. And I realized this, and I was actually like kind of happy here, like pawn to f3. I can just come back to d7, and now I'm gonna play queen c8 here. Let's say my opponent goes king h2. I can just like castle. Like the position's pretty good already. Let's say bishop g5, knight h7. Bishop comes back. I don't know. I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. In any case, let's look at the real game. My opponent goes bishop g5 now, which is actually one of the pretty good moves. He's stopping the move pawn to h4. I would have rather that she played the move pawn to h3, which I thought made a lot more sense. And now after pawn to h4, pawn to g4, actually this helps white because white wants to go in some kingside attacks in this position. But okay, I digress. My opponent goes bishop g5, and clearly her intention is after I castle, she wants to play queen d2, bishop h6, and trade off my dark squared bishop, which I decided after some thought that I was kind of okay with, and I decided short castle. My opponent goes queen d2, and here I'm thinking, okay, my opponent is going to win my bishop. My opponent's going to get my dark square bishop. If I try to defend it with moves like rook e8, bishop h6, bishop h8, this is just not the right plan. I've wasted a lot of time. My opponent kind of gets a free hand here. So I kind of have to give her the dark squared bishop. And I decide I'm going to work on my own plan. My plan is to get rid of her powerful light squared bishop. So first of all, I play the move bishop to d7 after like 5 minutes of thought, because this is actually a pretty difficult position to play. And my intention is to play queen c8, bishop to h3, take, and have like a decent position with maybe move like knight g5, and if my opponent's not careful, she can get mated. Of course, she's not going to get mated, she's going to play accurately, but maybe one day. My opponent goes bishop h6, obviously her idea. I play the move queen c8, obviously my idea, and my opponent trades, and plays the move pawn to f4, which makes a lot of sense. She's going with the classical plan in these structures, trying to put pressure over on the king side, moves like pawn to f5 and pawn to e5, along with maybe a g4 and h3 at some point. But okay, I think that she's not going to be able to work it out after losing the light squared bishop, so I play the move bishop h3. She goes pawn to f4, forcing me to take on g2, king g2, and I think for a little bit, and I play a really lazy move, like an extremely lazy move. I'm just thinking, nah, the position's probably okay. I'm sure there's some way to properly stop this attack, but I didn't really see how she's going to manage to like get it all working here. I thought I'm always going to have some like tactics in order to survive, and I just decide, I'm going to be lazy. Let's put the queen up and let's just connect the rooks. And life is good, and like maybe I have some counterattack, like h4, rook h8 stuff. I don't know. I'm going to try and make it work. And I realize immediately that actually this move is kind of terrible, and my opponent's position is very strong after a move like knight d5. And the idea is that if I take, first of all, I lose the defender of the king. My opponent can simply take, and I play a move like, I don't know, knight e5. Mouse is being a bit weird, sorry. Knight e5, let's say she takes. And already, I'm looking at this position, she gets this square. Huh. What have I done? That seems pretty bad. And I'm really not liking that, and I'm seeing this line, and I'm like, oh no, this is going to get really bad. I really hope she doesn't find this move. I haven't really calculated much else besides takes. Computer likes knight e5, but I really didn't like the idea that now I'm like separating these pawns in the long run. This pawn's going to be a weakness, and I'm just going to have to play a miserable position, and it's not looking good. But luckily my opponent doesn't play that move. She plays move queen to g5. Which is also pretty logical, putting some pressure on the king, getting in here like this. I think for a little bit, and play the move knight to e5, which I think is the only move in the position, because my opponent is trying to play the move knight to f4 and put some pressure here, so I have to over-defend the pawn on g6 first before doing anything else. I was also thinking about some like arbitrary like rook h8s and like rook h6s, but I thought this was clearly the best way to play because my knight wants to be in the center. Anyway, my opponent plays knight f4. And I start to think. So there's a couple of ideas here that I could go for. First of all, my position is like pretty decent. So maybe I can kind of go after her like this with the move like rook h8 and like come over here and stuff. But I was thinking here, I'm not sure exactly what I was thinking, but I was thinking here that in some lines, like getting my rook off the f file could be bad because this rook would have like free reign. Then my opponent could go like here. And then maybe somewhere in the future, my opponent could like sack on g6. And I was looking at these lines and I was kind of worried because then, of course, let me just put this on the board, like an arbitrary version of what I was talking about. Like FG, I thought this move knight d5. Let's say I play a random move like pawn to a6. And I thought my opponent could like take on g6. And the point was here. And, sorry, not like this. Was this the point? Yeah. Oh, but like this. Okay, I'm not sure I saw this, but I saw something like this. I thought maybe she could sack on g6. And I was getting worried, I was getting scared, and I was looking for some way to play it. And then I realized, wait a second, I can absolutely play the move knight to h7, which was my first intention. I didn't think I could play this because I was losing the h5 pawn. But then I realized, wait a second, knight to h7, knight h5, I just play king h8. My opponent's going to lose the knight next turn. Okay. that sounds pretty good. So I played the move knight to h7, and in like a minute, my opponent takes on h5 and just loses the game immediately. Knight to h7 is also like the only move for black to have an advantage here. This is like a pretty good position. I was calculating this move g5. I realized it didn't work. Now knight h5 and like king g8 and queen h3, and like he's fine and she's fine, but okay, maybe it's a little worrying. I would probably just play something else, like, I don't even know. Maybe I would find the best move. Best move is e6. I think maybe I'd be able to find this, like takes. This actually makes a lot of sense now that I'm looking at it. Maybe I'd be able to find that. Instead, knight h5, and all of that thought has gone down the drain because now I'm simply going to win the game. King to h8, queen h6, gh, I'm up a piece, queen takes h5, and I just have to work on how to properly convert this piece of advantage into a win. I think for a little bit, play the move pawn to f6. The idea is to, first of all, stop the move pawn to f6 herself, and then I want to go to queen e8 in some lines and try to trade off the queen. My opponent goes knight d5. I play the move queen to e8. If my opponent takes, I have to be careful not to take like this, because of course this fork could be bad. Yeah, that's the right option. My opponent goes queen h3, of course, keeping queens on the board. And I was thinking here, do I play queen f7 and try to bring my queen over here immediately, or not? I was kind of worried here. I didn't want to get like involved with this move knight here and here. I didn't like her getting this outpost, even though I knew that it probably wasn't that bad. I didn't want to go into this. So I decided to first play this move rook to c8, just stop this entirely, and argued that I have enough time to do so. My opponent goes rook f4, and here I actually make a really big mistake, which is my last mistake of the game, admittedly. Like, I played pretty well after this, but I don't think very often I play the move queen f7, which actually blunders a draw. Blunders a draw for like a couple of various reasons that are like pretty deep, but after rook h4, she didn't play rook h4, but after rook h4, basically the idea is that my king is kind of stuck here, and I don't really have the ability to run my king anymore. I play the move like rook g8, and life goes on, but it's not very good. It's actually a draw. Here I had to play king g7 now, and after rook h4, I can play like either rook h8, which is fine, or I can just play knight g5, and actually the queen is trapped. But that would be pretty nice. But okay, it doesn't really matter. Queen f7. My opponent doesn't play rook h4. She plays rook f1, and now I stop making mistakes, and the game is basically over. I go king g7. I find the move now. Pawn to g4. I go rook h8, bringing my knight in the game to go after this queen. Queen g3. I'm gonna skim through the rest of the game pretty quickly here because it's pretty simple. My opponent plays on for a very long time, but she never really gets another chance. I go king to f8, just trying to bring my king out of the center. I don't know why it's given a mistake. I don't think it should be. Rook at 4 f2. She hangs the pawn on g4. Of course, she can't take this because of rook g8. I'm just going to win more material. So she decides to go rook f4. I just bring my knight back to e5. King f2, rook g8 here, queen g7. Trying to infiltrate with my queen, get into the position. My opponent goes king e1. I was thinking about like going here, but I didn't think it worked. I thought my opponent did have the time to take on h7, and I didn't think that I was actually in time to mate her, because she's actually threatening this move here, and it's a little dangerous. Like here, like if she takes, I do actually have a win. Well, not a win, but like a draw here. Queen c2. She's forced to repeat moves, but okay, it doesn't really matter. I don't play this. I play the move knight g5 instead, getting my knight active into the position, and I'm actually trying to go over on the h file now and get him like that. King to e2, trying to further defend this square on f3. Rook h8, queen g3, and rook to h3, infiltrating with my rook. Queen here, queen h6, trying to get in with my queen, put pressure here. Rook 4 f2, king to f7. Idea, just bringing the other rook. Knight f4, which is actually a move that I missed during the game. I didn't realize my opponent could play like this, and I was getting a little worried here because now like my intention doesn't really work. My idea here, I was just gonna go rook g8 and like steamroll her, but it doesn't really matter. Knight f4 isn't really anything after rook h4. My opponent goes pawn to c3. Another move that does absolutely nothing. Like, she's trying to play this, but this just walks into my hands even if she gets that, so I don't know why this is the intention. I play rook g8. My opponent goes d4. I go with this move knight h3 now, which was my idea. Hit the queen, hit the rook, hit the knight, hit everything. My opponent's going to lose the game. Goes knight g6, takes. And in this position, I run out of moves because I stopped notating here. At some point during these games, when we get really low on time, I decided to stop notating. I just wanted to make moves faster, and I want to actually win the game. So in this position, I stopped notating, but what ended up happening is I was able to convert the position to simply being a rook and queen for queen, and I checkmated her with the queen kind of stuck in this side, and the king was over here. But anyway, that was a bit of a quicker game because there's not really much to talk about there. My opponent simply blundered and then lost. Let's get on to the final game, game number 3, which I actually got very lucky in. My opponent here is the highest rated player I've played. My opponent is 1783, bunch of 1700s, I know. And I'm trying to get into like some like interesting positions here. I really want more dynamic positions because I'm trying to win more games. My opponent also has 2 out of 2, so I have to be a little bit careful. But luckily, my opponent goes for a line that I know pretty well. My opponent goes pawn to e4 and enters this line of the dragon, which I've studied a lot. After d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6, the point of knight f6 is to force my opponent to knight c3 and avoid c4, which is the Maroczy bind. Knight c3, pawn to g6, bishop to e3, bishop g7, queen to d2. This is another very important moment in the opening. Queen to d2 actually allows a move that I knew existed, and here's the first time I spent time. I can play this move knight g4, and the point is that after bishop to g5, like, I'm doing pretty well. My opponent can't really give up the bishop pair right now. It's just not really in the cards here. Giving up the bishop pair is normally looked as bad. Like here, I can simply take. And like my position's already a lot better since I have this powerful g7 bishop, and my opponent isn't able to get some attack without the dark sword bishop present. So that would be very nice, but I decided not to go for it. I knew this move existed. I decided not to go for it because I don't like the positions that arise after bishop g5 and like knight c6, and I'm not a big fan of these. I'm just really not a big fan of these. They're good, like the engine likes them, but I really hate them, so I just didn't go for them. Instead, I decided castle, and I hope my opponent would go back to the lines I knew. He did. Pawn to f3, knight c6, long castles, and after this move, the line goes like this. Pawn to d5, I sacrifice a pawn, takes, knight takes pawn here. And if my opponent goes with knight d5 here, queen d5, I play the move queen c7. If he takes here, I play bishop f5. I just win the game immediately, so my opponent can't do that. And my opponent didn't go for this. My opponent knew the theory properly. Play the move bishop to d4, which is the best move. Here, there's still a theory. You have to play pawn to e5, bishop c5, and here the best move is bishop to e6. And this is where my knowledge of the position kind of ended, and where my opponent's knowledge of the position also obviously ended because my opponent made a mistake. Here, you can't take the rook. This is like one little trap here. Queen f8 is very strong for black. First of all, I'm threatening this move bishop h6, which is just going to win the queen immediately. But second of all, these bishops are actually just monsters on these diagonals. They're just so large with rook b8. It's very difficult for white to play. But instead of that, my opponent ended up playing the move that I didn't know. This move knight e4 I knew, which existed. I would play the move rook e8. And it can get a little bit awkward. Like this move knight d6, I'm not always sure of playing. I guess rook e7, that's something to note. Anyway, it gets kind of awkward here. You have to know what you're doing with white. Like after h4, I played a move like pawn to h6. Life is actually pretty good here. Instead, my opponent doesn't go for this. My opponent goes for bishop c4. And here I start thinking, because I've never seen this position before, I didn't know what the plans were, and I didn't know what I was supposed to do. So I play this move rook e8, which just saves the rook. And in a lot of positions, you do save the rook. But not here. Not here. Actually, my opponent is able to win a pawn here with bishop d5. which he ends up doing. But what I'm supposed to do after bishop c4, and what gives black an advantage here, is this move knight c3, which I looked at during the game, but I didn't know what to do after queen c3. Now I see that I have to play this move queen g5 and bishop e3 and like queen g2, and I just kind of call his bluff. Fe, let's say takes. I can take on f3. No, I have to sack all my pawns and play this position, which is actually like from here looks pretty good, but from a distance, I'm not sure I would have gone for this. Instead, rook e8. My opponent takes with the knight, which is pretty logical. I take back with the pawn. My opponent goes bishop d5, and here I make my first real mistake of the game. I'm supposed to play this move queen c7 here, which I was considering. To like just sack the rook in the corner, but I just was a little bit unsure of this. And when you're unsure of like a rook sacrifice, normally the best way to go about it is just to not go for it. And like queen c5, and I was looking at this, and I was looking at bishop d5. Here I actually have rook d8 and just win the game, which I didn't really see. But even if bishop e4, like this is what I have to go for. I just have to like arbitrarily take the pawn on a2 and just kind of pray that my position is okay. I'm not sure I like this. I'm really not sure I like this. This dark squared bishop doesn't really look that good. It's kind of blocked in with my pawn. I would have loved to sacrifice my pawn, like this move. Let's say I have another move. I would love to play a move like pawn to e4 at some point, but I'm not able to do that. So I don't know. I didn't really want to go for this, and instead I just decided to take and then go queen c7, which makes sense because now I'm putting my queen on this file. I want to go rook c8. I want to go rook d8. My mouse is being a little bit weird, sorry. And I want to go after the king, which is what you normally do in these positions. You're down a pawn, but you have compensation through your bishop and your rook's being very powerful against this king. And I've had some really brilliant games here. My opponent goes bishop to a3. Pretty logical move, bringing the bishop back out of the way, making sure it's not in target of rook a c8 and defending the pawn on b2. I play rook a c8 anyway. My opponent goes back with the move queen to b3. And now officially black is actually better, which is very, very nice. If only I play a very, very interesting move, which is this move pawn to e4. And the point is I'm sacrificing another pawn. Not really, like I can just recapture. But the real idea is that I'm going to open up my dark squared bishop. And then my position's going to be pretty good, actually. This attack's getting very, very strong. My opponent doesn't have queen c3 anymore, and life is very good. And I find the move. I play pawn to e4. And I'm like borderline winning if my opponent doesn't know what they're doing. It's actually a really, really difficult position. It's surprising how tricky this type of position is. My opponent thinks for a while. He goes bishop to d6. Which I think is okay. He's just bringing the bishop out with tempo. I play queen to c6. I didn't think, okay, not much to see here. Queen to c6 makes a lot of sense. My opponent goes fe, and I decide to simply take with a rook. And I'm playing perfectly. Like, everything is great. I sacrifice the pawn. My rook is active. This is coming. This is here. The bishop is going to enter the game at some point. This king looks really, really weak. If my opponent goes pawn to c3, I'm already thinking takes. Of course, this is a bad move at this point, but I'm probably just going to play a move like rook c4 and then take. And my opponent is going to go here, and then I'm going to find some move. Already queen e4 is -4, threatening the bishop, which is kind of funny with this pin. And my opponent can't get out of the way because, of course, the queen here. And if my opponent goes here, this is mate 1. It's very, very nice. In any case, my opponent finds a very, very nice resource in order to kind of defend himself with this move rook to h2 f1. And this invites me to make a mistake, which I promptly do. There's only one good move in this position, which I didn't realize at the time. There's only one good move in this position. It's the move rook to e6. And this is strong. This is a very, very strong move. My opponent has to come back, let's say to b4 or something. And then I can just take the pawn. And this is a problem. It's just the same position, but I'm no longer down a pawn. That's basically what's going on. I'm going to come here. He's going to take on f7. I'm just going to walk my king over here, and this is going to be just death. It's over. It's over in this position if I find this little sequence of moves. Unfortunately, I don't find the sequence of moves, and instead I go for a different way to go about it. I go with the move rook to c4, which is the same thing of blocking the queen's vision to f7. But now the difference is that I'm not attacking the bishop. So my opponent has the time to defend the g2 pawn and the pawn in c2 with the move rook to f2. And this is the difference. And I really wish I had found rook e6, because the game would have been over a lot faster and I wouldn't have made the other mistakes that I did. But okay, rook c4 is fine. It's not the end of the world. Black still has an advantage despite being down a pawn. So again, like, I'm still playing pretty accurately. My opponent goes rook f2. And here's the real mistake. I don't know why I play this move. I don't know why I didn't play the move pawn to a5. This move seems very, very logical. This is the top engine move. I could have found this very easily. I'm just going to be playing the move pawn to a4 on the next move. And it's really difficult. My opponent has to play king b1 only move. Otherwise, it's -2 immediately. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I really don't know why I didn't see this move. But okay, again, I make a mistake. I play the move bishop to h6 check, which is a mistake. And after king b1, I realized that I've actually helped my opponent. The point of this move was to primarily stop this rook from coming in to defend. This was my idea. And then I wanted to go with this move rook d8. But here I realize, after my opponent's next move, that I'm not actually doing too well. And this move bishop h6 really hurt me, not just because of king b1, but because of now this rook is actually genuinely pinned to this pawn. Because now, let's say I were to move the rook. Again, this is a blunder. Okay, whatever. Here. Queen f7 here and bishop to e5 wins the game immediately. However, if my bishop was on the g7 square, let's say I go here, after queen f7 here, now my opponent isn't exactly winning. He's still winning after bishop e5, but it's a little bit more difficult. It's a little bit more difficult, and here I'm actually, well, I have to sack my queen, but it's again not as bad. I'm not getting mated immediately. So that's kind of the problem with bishop h6 and king b1. And after rook d8, my opponent realizes this and plays a very, very interesting move. He plays the move rook d4, which loses the game immediately. But if I take, now this works. Oh, very nice tactical find. However, also in this position, I'm getting very, very nervous. I realize that I'm going to lose, I think. I thought I was going to lose after this move rook d4. Because I thought after this move rook d6, which made a lot of sense, my opponent can't take the rook because of back rank mate himself. And if my opponent takes here, I simply take the queen, take and mate, right? I thought my opponent had this move queen d8, forking my king and the rook, but I missed here, and this is actually kind of embarrassing. I missed bishop f8, which just defends the rook. And then I'm like, okay, it's whatever, but again, these types of things add up. I should be able to see this. Instead, I go for a different line. I end up playing this move rook to e8. And this actually wins the game, but I didn't realize it immediately. I got very lucky with this move, I thought. And the point is, I'm threatening back rank mate. I'm hoping that my opponent goes back. But I thought that my opponent from afar, I thought my opponent could go with this move pawn to a3. But then I realized, wait a second, pawn to a3 doesn't work. Because now I can take the rook. Now I can take the rook. And after queen f7 here, my opponent no longer has bishop e5 because of the rook here. And oh my god, I was so happy. I was so happy when I saw this. And when my opponent started not playing the move instantly, I was just like ecstatic. Oh my goodness. Like most amazing little area here. So my opponent ended up thinking for a while, he played the move pawn to c3. But at this time, I realized that the rook was actually hanging and that now queen f7 doesn't work. So I simply take the rook. Queen takes f7, king h8. My opponent has nothing anymore. He plays some bishop f4, queen to e4, king at c1, and after bishop takes f4, my opponent resigns. Because there's nothing he can do. My opponent can take. I can simply take this, and I'm up 2 rooks. But even here, I should have a mate, yeah, like this. Queen d1 is checkmate easily. And yeah, this is a very, very nice little way to win my games. And after this tournament, which I go 3-0, which is something that never happens. I almost never win tournaments like this. I am actually going to hit 1900. My unreleased rating is 1904, which is a rating that I have never been. So I'm very excited. I'm very excited. Only 100 more points, and then I will be officially considered a chess expert, which is something I have wanted like ever since I started playing chess. So I'm actually I'm in a pretty good mood, and I hope that I can win more tournaments like this. Either way, that's all I've got for you today. My voice is getting very hoarse from talking for an hour. Bit of a longer video. If you stayed till the end, I mean, good on you. That's a lot of chess. I don't know if I'd be able to survive that long. And yeah, that's it. If you enjoyed, remember to like, subscribe, do all the normal things YouTubers tell you to do. If you didn't enjoy, I'm really sorry. I tried to make a good video. Yeah, but that's it. Good evening and good night.